I couldn't do a comic like this if I were working with a traditional publisher, and in today's art chat, I'll tell you why. So if you're not familiar with my work, I'm Becca Hilburn. I'm a watercolor comic artist. I make the watercolor comic 7-inch Kara. You can read it as a webcomic at 7inchkara.com, or if you're a fan of the Dead Tree format, you can find it at natosoup.com/shop. I have the first 2 volumes of the book out, and I am currently working on the 3rd. And there are a myriad of reasons why I would not necessarily be such a good fit for a traditional kidlit or comics publisher with the types of comics and the type of artwork that I make, and I want to tell you guys why today. I've shared my comic making process here on YouTube for a really long time. I have a boatload of comic making tutorials in a variety of different comic formats, but I prefer to work traditional in a world that's going more digital. And there's nothing wrong with going more digital. That saves a lot of time in a lot of ways, but I really like the intentionality of making art by hand. It just does something for me. So while I have my first degree in digital art, it's not really my favorite, and most of my digital processes are actually either in the early sketching stages or on the lettering, cleanup, color correction, laying out the book stages. So I just work really slow by modern comic publisher standards. So these watercolor pages here are going to take me about 5 days to paint. That's not including the time it took to write the chapter, that's not including the time it took to do the thumbnails, and that's not including the time it took to do the roughs. It's also not including the time it's going to take to scan these, color correct these, border these, letter these, or lay them out in a book. I'm a self-published comic artist because 1, I work really slow. 2, it allows me to tell the kind of stories that I want to tell. I don't have to worry about what a publisher thinks is going to sell, which currently in the kidlit and middle grade market is still stories primarily set in schools or stories set in a high fantasy setting, and I have zero interest in either of those. I like stories about friendship set in nature about tiny people, and those are just not a great fit for traditional kidlit publishing right now. And it's a pitch that, while many editors might like it, there isn't room in the market for it. So the kind of stories I want to tell are not the kind of stories that publishers are currently looking to publish, and it's not in a format that publishers are currently looking at. So as you guys can see, I work in full color watercolor, and many kidlit publishers do want full color books, but they don't want the time constraints that watercolor necessitates. I could move to digital, as we've talked about, and if I had a publisher I really liked and a pitch they really loved, that would be a concession I would be willing to make. Basically, I would be willing to make one of 3 concessions. I have some underlying health issues and some family obligations that make my time a little less predictable, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So if they were willing to give me a whole lot of time, I would be more than happy to work with them. If they were willing to let me tell the kind of story I want to tell, I'd be willing to kind of wiggle around with the materials that I'm using. Or if they let me use the materials that I want to use, I would be willing to tell the kind of story that they want to tell. But unfortunately, unless you are already very established and very popular and very beloved in our industry, you don't get to pick. You get to do what you're told to do. As of right now, I get to call all the shots with my comic. I get to decide the pace. I get to decide the content. I get to decide when the next book is going to come out. I get to decide how the next book is coming out. I get to decide the avenues in which the next book is sold. And as an indie publisher that does have some limitations, there are some avenues that are just not really available to me or require a whole lot of arm wrestling to get to. But with Kindle print on demand, that does open up some options that were not traditionally available to vanity and small press publishers like I am. Also, indie comics, self-published comics in the comic sphere does not have the negative connotations that it has with self-published children's books or self-published books in general. I'm not speaking out negatively about self-publishing. This is a field that I work in. I have friends who are prose writers who work in this, and it does offer a lot of flexibility. And if you're very savvy, you can definitely kind of work it in a way that works in your favor. I am not savvy whatsoever. I have ADHD and no business sense. So that's not really an area that I can talk proficiently on. Joseph actually can talk about it a lot more. And maybe if you guys ask super duper nicely, he'll be willing to talk about that for you guys in a video at some point. But he did talk about it in pretty great lengths for our Kickstarter. So that might be something worth checking out. So, I chose indie publishing, indie comics, web comics, basically from the get-go. I was heavily inspired by KeenSpot and KeenSpace and Sluggy Freelance and Boy Meets Boy. There were a whole lot of web comics when I was growing up in a comic space that at that time and where I lived was currently dominated by male-driven narratives of superhero power fantasies, which just not for me, not my interest whatsoever. So webcomics and manga showed me that there's a whole world of storytelling outside of what traditional publishers deem as marketable. So like when I went into comics and webcomics as an independent, it was very intentional. My goal had always been to be like a studio artist working for a studio, picking up work like that, but working on my own projects and distributing them myself. So this is a little look at my comic process. We've got my script, we've got my roughs, we've got my thumbnails, we've got my study sketches. I'm going to talk about this more in my chapter 9 vlog. And I have a bunch of tutorials where I talk about my comic process. But you see, I love sharing my process. I love sharing my education. I have a master's degree in comics from SCAD. I paid a lot of money for that. So I want you guys to be able to skip that and just watch my videos instead. So if I were working with a traditional publisher, there wouldn't be time for this. I wouldn't be able to record these videos. I wouldn't be able to record these tutorials. I wouldn't be able to share them with you. Even if the publisher thought it was a good idea for promotion, there just wouldn't be the time. The time constraints in traditional comic publishing is, oh boy, okay? A publisher might expect a full 300-page-ish, 160 pages, depending on, who you're working for, what your genre is, what your age range is. They might expect that in a 2-year time period. I'm talking concept to completion. I'm talking like you haven't even really started the scripts yet. You started the pitch and they want that in 2 years. That might sound like a lot of time, but once you get into the nitty gritty of working on comics and working on the comic process and working with an editor or working with an artist or working with a letterer, you will see how quickly that time just kind of dissolves. Weekends, you didn't even know her. I don't have weekends. We don't get weekends. We should take weekends, but those are not factored in. The traditional 9 to 5 work hours are absolutely not a consideration for traditional publishing for the writers, the artists, the colorists, the letterers who work in their fields. They really don't care if we sleep. And I don't say that to be ugly. It's just a fact. They just want it done. They don't care what you have to do to get it done. Now, if you're a more popular, bigger name artist, they might care more because they don't want to lose you. They don't want you to get sick. But if you're like an average, just getting going, work-a-day artist, they don't really care. So in my Comics Broke Me art chat, I touched on a little bit about how someone I'd gone to school with died recently from overwork and exhaustion. He was working on 4 titles for a few different publishers just trying to make ends meet. The page rates in comics for a finished page are abysmally low. If you get $100 for a finished page of art, that's considered pretty dang good. Let's compare that to when I sell watercolor originals at shows. If I charge less than $100 for an original piece, people will accuse me of like ruining the art market and driving down prices and sabotaging everybody else. Yet in publishing, there's absolutely nothing wrong with paying $100, more commonly less, for a finish. I mean, if it's going to be inked, it is inked. If it's going to be drawn, it's drawn. If it's going to be painted, it's painted. If it's going to have colors, it's colored. If it's going to be lettered, it's lettered. Like soup to nuts finished comic page. $100 in the US is considered a fair rate. Now, that's per day. Like theoretically, an artist might be able to produce 1 page per day. I can't. I can do 2 4 comas a day, but I can't produce a page of 7-inch Cara in a single day. I can't produce a page of black and white line art comic in a day. I tried that with my Cicada Summer pitch. I physically am not able to do that. The arthritis doesn't allow me to do that. The migraines don't allow me to do that. And a lot of people who work in comics are disabled. They either start off with a disability or they end up with a disability. I started out with migraines. I ended up with arthritis. So there's physical limitations to running yourself ragged that way. And from very early on, I've had migraines. So I knew the migraines were going to be a limiting factor for me. It was going to keep me from being able to put in as much time as other artists could put in potentially. It was going to take days away from me randomly that I couldn't predict. And if I pushed myself during a migraine, I'd get a cluster migraine and get progressively sicker over the course of 5 or more days. And I know that because that happened to me at SCAD multiple times. I tried the whole push hard and work hard and sleep comes after death BS, and that almost killed me, and it's killed people I know. So that was not a track that was going to work for me. So for me to be able to make comics, I needed to be able to work independently and sell them independently. And I am just going to caveat right here. A lot of comic artists do not have the financial flexibility to do their own thing, to go their own way. Our market, our industry is set up, frankly, whether you're indie or you're trad pub or anything in between, it is set up to drive to the lowest price. When you work anime cons, they want to pay the lowest price for your stuff at the table. Everybody wants a deal. When we're working in books, it's always about the lowest price, the cheapest price. What are they charging at Walmart? What are they charging at Barnes & Noble? Indie, we just don't have the ability to compete with that. We don't see the sales numbers that those mass retailers see. We don't have the marketing budgets. We don't have the movie options. So realistically, we should be charging more for our work. And I hope that our audience can appreciate the need for that and isn't expecting Walmart prices from an individual who's doing every single aspect of the process. So when it comes to financial stability, a lot of artists choose to have a day job. Like a lot of webcomic artists have a day job. And the day job is the priority. The day job is the stability. And the comic is something they do for fun because they love it. And the audience will often punish them for that. Not me. Y'all are so nice to me. But I have so many friends who do webtoons or tapas who get the nastiest comments for a day late update, for an update that's on time and the person just got their days mixed up. For someone who has said that they're going on hiatus and comes back when they say they're coming back, and they'll still get fussed at. Like some of the attitudes around free comics are really toxic and are killing the artist, because if you're willing to kill yourself to be a professional for a webcomic, we're not getting paid. We're not being treated professionally in return. So that kind of update schedule just wouldn't have been feasible for me. So I do YouTube stuff, don't earn a lot of money from that. I do Patreon stuff, earn some money from that, but it's not enough to pay the bills. I do craft fairs and conventions. I used to do anime cons for a really long time, and those were starting to kind of kill me. So I'm trying to switch out to something that's less travel and less intensive, and I can have a larger setup, and I'm not screaming over the boomboxes in the artist alley. And I haven't quite found my financial footing when it comes to craft fairs yet, so I'm still figuring that out. I also have an online shop. But to be blunt, I am very privileged in that my spouse works in a completely unrelated field, and he earns enough money that we both can live off of it. Our expenses in general we try to keep them lower. They're not as low as they can go. But I wanted to bring this up because I have friends who have literally just died trying to make ends meet through comics. And I talked a lot about why comics broke me. And that was on a personal misogyny level, but the finances of making comics is just really rough. And there are artists who are far better than me. Ian was far better than I am and far faster than I am, who couldn't make ends meet. So I want to bring some awareness to the issue, not to discourage you from making comics or learning how to make comics or reading comics, but I think awareness is a good thing. And I think knowing what your options are is a good thing. So I opted to go indie pretty early on with volume 1. That was 10 years ago, so a really long time ago, because the market wasn't looking for comics about girls, wasn't looking for comics about girls with ADHD, wasn't looking for watercolor comics. Actually, at that time, kids comics hadn't quite taken off, and we were still seeing a lot of black and white comics when it came for, like, when I say indie, I basically mean non-superhero comics. So, like, I was doing all the things they didn't want to see back then, and I'm still doing all the things they don't want to see, but going in the other direction because I'm just stupid and stubborn. But I knew that while doing comics professionally would be fun, if the page rate is terrible. It's gross. Like, it's a bad deal. $100 for a page of comics, and you don't get royalties. You get hardly any advance. I'm talking in like the single digit thousands. That's meant to last you the duration of the project. But if I could take the timescape out, if I could take we need this in 6 months, we need this in 1 year part out, and I could just work on it at my own pace, that might have been more appealing to me. But I just can't physically keep up with the pace that's expected in traditional comics. Even if I switch my style completely, it just wouldn't have been feasible for me. So that was like a huge consideration. And then I kind of figured, okay, if I'm going to pay for my own project, if I'm going to put my own time into this and not necessarily see money out of it, I should just do the thing I really, really want to do. I should do my Tiny People comic about friendship with an ADHD female main character who is loud and energetic and super friendly and feels all of the feelings at a 10. I should just put my whole heart and soul into this comic, and there should be animal writing and lots of nature and lots of insects, and do it in watercolor because that's what I want to do. Because if nobody's going to pay me to do this, and I feel like I have to do this anyway, I want to do this anyway, I have the story I want to tell, I should fail by my own choices if I'm going to fail at all. So, like, that was a decision that I made 10 plus years ago. Do I regret it? You know, before reading everything in the comics broke me hashtag, I did. I really wondered if I just like killed myself for a little while, for 2 years, would it have gotten it better? Did I make a big mistake by acknowledging I have these health limitations early on and try to work around those instead of killing myself over them? Was I just too difficult to work with because I didn't want to pitch 6 different comics that I don't have any love for at all because it's a subject matter that I just don't like? I find school comics, for the most part, boring. I spent those years trying actively to imagine I wasn't in school. So I'm more of like a Redwall person than I am a Harry Potter person. I don't want to pretend I'm in school when I'm not in school. Also, at that time, I was very used to representing myself. I was already doing a bunch of anime cons, talking to people. I was doing a blog. Like, a lot of traditional publishers expect you to basically do all your own marketing, and they're not going to. You're not their priority. So if you don't, or if you're uncomfortable with it, or if you're unfamiliar with it, or marketing changes all the time, people get very savvy to feeling like they're being sold to. Even if it's something that they would love, they are very resistant to it. So, like, I would be probably doing my own marketing for my projects anyway. So I really felt like if I just did it myself, I could do what I wanted to do. And I might have a smaller audience. I might have a smaller reach, but I could curate that audience. It could be people who I like really resonate with and who are like me, who I like really want to engage with. I could choose what shows I do. I could choose my own pace. If I get sick or a family member gets sick, and I'm not the only one in my family with systemic serious health issues. So that kind of flexibility is really, really important to be able to put the comic pages aside with zero guilt and go help a family member out or bring them to the doctor. That's really important to me. I also wanted the ability to raise a family, which hasn't really happened for us, but I wanted that flexibility. A lot of femme people in comics don't have the time to have a child, don't have the time to raise a child. Like, it gets put off and put off and put off until we're like 40, and then we're struggling with like in vitro. And that is definitely, you know, a reality I'm kind of looking at and making my own decisions about, because a lot of us think if we just work hard, we can create a career that won't be taken away from us as soon as we get pregnant. Because a lot of us knew female comic artists in the 90s or from the 80s who that happened to them. Everybody loved them till they got pregnant, and then they assume that just because you're pregnant, you can't hold a pencil. So I kind of wanted to like misogyny proof myself as much as possible with my comics, and making girly comics with girly characters is already like misogyny bait in many instances. So this was a choice that I made. And like I mentioned earlier, you know, sometimes I've wondered, well, if I just sacrificed more, would I have a different career? And comics broke me. And I'm really sad to say this because I really wanted better for everybody else involved. I thought I was just a screw up. And that is a common refrain a lot of people are saying, because they kept us so divided and kept us from really talking to each other. Almost everybody had it really bad. Almost everybody ate a lot of dirt and just smiled around mouthfuls of dirt. So like, I feel a little bit better about some of my indie choices. I don't feel like I'm as much of a failure because I chose to go indie. I am not like looking at what's happened to them and gloating. I feel awful about it. I'm so angry for them. I'm so angry our industry is like this and is so predatory. But it makes me feel like maybe I'm not as big a screw up as I thought I was. Because I mean, you're always going to, whenever you choose one path, part of you is always going to wonder what would have happened if you'd chosen the other path. And I mean, I probably would be dead by now because while I was at SCAD was killing me. I was having horrific migraines. I was getting sick all the time. I was getting injured a lot because I wasn't getting enough sleep. When I graduated, I had this really bad anxiety breakdown. Like I couldn't live like that. So the thought of trying to make myself live that pace for an indefinite amount of time was like just not really going to happen for me. So there's a lot of like industry practicalities that made going self-represented, self-published very appealing to me. I also don't and have not lived in a comics hub. Living in a comics hub like New York, San Francisco, Toronto puts you in contact with editors and publishers. It makes it accessible to go and show your portfolio at events. You're not paying this astronomical airfare. You're not paying these really high hotel fees. And it also puts you in contact with other comic artists that like you can hang out with and you can share rooms with and you can critique each other's work and you can socialize. And like when I lived in Nashville, I did not have that at all. Now that I live in Louisiana, I do not have that. I'm trying to train my students and they're so smart and they're like, they're going to get it. They're going to get it. To be able to give good critique, you know, not just for me, but for their own benefit. But like, if you can't afford to live in a comics hub, whether you're not making enough money or you don't come from a family or a husband or a wife who can financially support those goals, or you're not willing to take out massive amounts of debt, it does keep you from certain opportunities. So, you know, my chances might have been better if I'd lived in an area or like Portland, Oregon, or Seattle, Washington. If I lived in an area that had a better comic scene, but I have never lived in that kind of an area. None of my family lives in that kind of an area. None of my friends who are close enough that we could like think about being roommates together live in those kind of areas. So it just wasn't financially feasible for me. And it was a risk that I wasn't comfortable with taking. And I'm very risk averse. I might be ADHD, but like I am super duper risk averse and not particularly impulsive. I've been burned in the past, so I kind of have like I have an allergic reaction to risky behavior. So there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of things I should have done that I couldn't do because of the high anxiety. And like knowing that, I feel like I picked a path that while it's not working the way I want it to work for me, it's also not killing me. I'm not about to die from this. So that was also a big part of going indie published and not doing traditional publishing. And I've been in anthologies. I've had work traditionally published before, but those were different scale projects and they were much shorter and more condensed. So like I could feasibly carve out 2 weeks to just hammer that thing out rather than the next 2 years of my life being like that and like slowly killing me. That's just something that I wouldn't have necessarily been able to do. So earlier we talked about me having 2 comic volumes out. Now, when I say I have 2 comic volumes out, what I mean is we're not talking about my minis. We're not talking about indies. We're not talking about anthologies. We are talking about full book length projects that I have put out. So volume 1 came out in 2014. We did it through, it was called CreateSpace at the time, but it's Kindle KDP now. And I have videos where I talk about that. And I was able to do full color. The price wasn't quite, the margins on this book are not very good. Y'all are not, I cannot give you guys much of a deal. Y'all are basically paying what I'm paying to have these books. But the nice thing about print on demand is you can do limited runs, and really it's color that makes it more expensive. If you do all black and white, it becomes much cheaper. So for Volume 1, I'd been running the blog for a while. I'd been accruing some goodwill. I'd been doing conventions. So by the time Volume 2 was ready to put out, I'd already been in a comics collective. I'd already been running the blog for like 8 years. I had a YouTube channel for a while. I was doing fairly regular streams. I was doing a lot of anime conventions. So we felt like doing a Kickstarter to raise the funds for Volume 2 was a smart step. We were ready for that. We were ready to take the plunge. And I say we because Joseph helps so much. I don't know about my friends in traditional publishing, how much their spouses, their best friends have to help them. But Joseph has to help. Joseph helps me a lot. I do the writing, I do the art, but he edits for me. He lays the books out after the pages have been done. He does a lot of copy editing. He helps so much. I could not pay for that level of help. He is so fantastic. And he works in a completely unrelated field. He is not a comic artist. So the fact that he's willing to do this for me is just such a huge gift. And it's not something you could count on. Like, look, okay, if you just started a relationship with somebody, probably don't count on them being your manager, your editor, your copy editor, the person who pays the bills. Like, maybe don't bank on that. That is what happened for us. But like, that's super, like, as I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so super fortunate, but also very vulnerable. So anyway, so for Volume 2, we ran a Kickstarter. Our goal was $7,000. That is the cost of printing these books. Printing these books ate that cost. We went with I wanted to go with a Louisiana publisher, but we couldn't find one. We wanted to go with Sustainably Forested Wood because obviously it's a comic about nature and friendship. Like, come on, y'all. Also, my minor was in Earth Environmental Science, and I know some people they might not say anything nice to me, but if I had done the book wrong, I might have heard about it. And I don't remember who we printed with at this time, but I've done videos about that. Basically, the cost of printing the books ate up the whole Kickstarter. And we kind of knew that, but that's a reality that I think a lot of people don't realize. And reading comics made me feel a lot better that I am by a long shot, not the only one who runs a Kickstarter to print their books. And it's basically the cost of printing the books. I really feel like we need better community, and it needs to not be at conventions. We just need better community because I felt so validated and so not like a failure reading all these other people's struggles. But we're all really reticent to talk about our struggles because comics is such a meritocracy. It's treated like it's a meritocracy. It's not a true meritocracy by a really long shot. And anytime you talk about what doesn't work for you or what failed, you get accused of being sour grapes. You get accused of not appreciating your audience. You get accused of not appreciating the industry, of not being grateful, of not being hungry, of not working hard enough, of not being skilled enough. I mean, even me sharing like the mildest of takes that I shared on my Twitter about my experiences with Comics Broke Me garnered some, well, you're just not skilled enough and you just don't work hard enough from somebody who, not that followers make everything, but this is somebody with like 100 followers and they don't have any art on their account. So, you know, like, I'm going to like take it with a grain of salt, but there's always people who are willing to rip you down if you show any weakness because they think they can take your place by doing that. Spoiler, ain't gonna happen like that. I'm self-employed, so good luck. But it does make it hard for artists to be really vulnerable and really honest about that because everyone is so quick. I mean, artists, non-artists, all kinds of people are so quick to be like, well, if, you know, it's a market economy and under capitalism that drives supply and demand. And obviously there isn't enough demand for what you're supplying because you're just not good enough. Like that starts real quick. We have that really embedded with us. So it's hard for comic artists to want to talk about the failures until they're wildly successful. And then like, who's going to say you're not skilled enough, right? But none of us ever really get to the wildly successful part where we can talk about those failures or where we could organize organize and where we could work together to create a better system. So for volume 2, this doesn't look twice as thick, but it is printed on better paper with better inks. So this book is literally twice as thick as volume 1. And we have to charge more for it because it is literally twice as thick as volume 1. But I wanted to make it worth it. And as the person who is publishing this book, I get to make all the choices. I can make good choices, I can make bad choices, I can make weird choices, but I get to make the choices. I got to choose the printer, I got to choose the paper, I got to choose the cover stock, I got to choose the interior, I got to choose to do full color, I got to choose to have a cast of characters page and an introduction and illustrations on like every single page that I had to make that came out of my dime, but it was really important to me to do it. I got to choose to do a recap and then do a 4-coma recap in black and white, wasting that color printing because you can see there's tone on the back of the page and then we have black and white. There are people who would say that would be a waste, but I got to choose that because I wanted to do that. I got to do it in an art style that I think is really fun and that I really enjoy doing, but there isn't much demand for it in my normal day-to-day work. I got to include other spot illustrations that I've created over the years. I got to include a map, which people who like maps know I get so many compliments on the fact that I've included maps at the front of volume 1 and volume 2. Y'all fear not, I am not done with the maps. Can I read a map? No, but I like maps. I got to choose to do the design on the sides of the page. I designed the font. I did all of like the border work digitally. Like I chose to do the page numbers as like, we created a font out of this, but it's meant to look like stitching because I grew up doing a lot of embroidery and a lot of sewing, and Kara's mom, Meldina, is like the local tailor, and she's trying to teach her daughter her craft. I got to draw cat riding, lots and lots of cat riding. I got to show this very different friendship and them bonding over like unique to them cultural experiences like soda and ham roll-ups and zebra cakes. Like I got to make those decisions. And I ran this, I was part of Ink Drop Cafe at the time. I ran pretty much all the chapters of volume 2 and volume 1 across a bunch of different people. I got a lot of feedback, a lot of people who would point out the mistakes when they're mistakes, because the point is to make the project grow and to make it better, to not just like suck up to somebody and not want to hurt their feelings, but it's to point out things that need to be pointed out so that you can make the strongest comic project possible. And that when you're working with a traditional publisher, that isn't always the case. You may often not be their first priority. They may drag out responding to you. I mean, that's been my personal experience where projects have died because the editor took months and months and months to get back to me. But if I took a weekend to get back to them because I was sick that weekend or had a con that weekend, I was not interested in the project. So, this isn't a perfect system, but it really allows me to, look at this super girly little montage here of Naomi being like, hey, I got some doll clothes. You want to try on some doll clothes? And Kara being like, what? I've never seen clothes like this before. And then I get to have the little 80s-tastic fashion montage. I feel like this whole spread would be possibly a hard sell to an editor unless the editor and I just like really, really, really vibed. So self-publishing, it allows me to make, mistakes, but it also frees me up to make the kind of art, to tell the kind of stories that at least are meaningful to me and will hopefully be meaningful to other people. A big part of me making, look, a squirrel drawn horse and buggy carriage, Kara's worst fear. How nerdy is that? That is super nerdy. But I make the kind of comics that I desperately wanted to see as an ADHD little girl growing up in the rural South who had some trouble keeping friends and spent all her time outside and liked anime and manga. So, maybe that is a super small demographic. Maybe it's not. But I got to decide that. And some of these pages are gorgeous, and I would not have been able to put the time in to paint them if I was trying to pump out a page every day or a page every 2 days. So I often joke when I'm doing panels and workshops that I have found 1,000 ways not to invent the light bulb. And it's true. I've tried a bunch of different things. Joseph has tried a bunch of different things. We have tried all kinds of different kinds of marketing. We've done all kinds of different shows. We still haven't quite found the secret sauce that seems to work. And I will admit, I'm very envious of like hand letterers on Instagram or, like the people who do kind of the limited watercolor or the watercolor landscapes, because their fan base is huge. They can sell out on workshops that cost hundreds of dollars for hand lettering. Every book they put out seems to sell out. Okay, I don't know their lives. I'm judging based on what social media is showing me. Their lives might be completely different. It might be a very comics broke me situation where you grin through the tears because you're afraid someone's going to take your place. But I want for comics, I want for my comic what I'm seeing for hand letterers. Like I would never, ever, ever take that away from them, but I want some of that pie too. So speaking of getting to make choices, I got to include a whole bonus chapter about Naomi's first day of high school in a new school system that isn't even part of the webcomic. So I'm not going to show you guys too much. And it's a combination of inks and watercolors. And it took a lot of work because it took a lot of cleanup too. And I have a feeling a publisher would have been like, you got to hurry this up. You're dragging on way too long. I got to include a guest art gallery in the book because as I do conventions, I will commission people to draw Kara. And I always ask if I have their permission to use it in the back of the book for the guest art gallery. And I always try to credit them as best as I can, either based on what they've given me or based on what I can find at the time of printing, because we all switch social media pretty quickly. I don't know that a publisher would have allowed me to do that. Might have been too much of a liability. But I'm also very proud of this section because it shows how many other artists that I've supported and how many artist friends I have. And it also gives, maybe you could think of it as a directory of other cool artists. And like another thing that I think a publisher would not let me do is I have a whole back section of my comic process that I shared because I love comics and I want the readers of my books to be inspired to make comics the way I was inspired to make comics reading manga. And I'm a huge nerd for other people's process and their materials. So I had the chance to really dive into that and do these super cute little illustrations that I'm sure somebody would have been like, you need to pick up the pace. I got to include like a planning and writing section with all these new little spot illustrations. I got to include photos of the process. Like this is all hugely, these are from some of the tutorials that I've done that are over on YouTube. That's why some of them are upside down. I got to include lots of, actual process. And okay, the layout is a disaster for this part. I laid it out, Joseph fixed it, and we're still not super happy with it. This is an area that obviously could be better if we'd worked with someone who knew what they were doing and had some tricks up their sleeves and had some experience. This was an area we opted not to pay out of pocket to bring in an extra person. Oops, sorry, y'all. That was a choice that we made together because, we raised $7,000 for the book. We just did not, that went to printing the book. I didn't even get paid for making the book, okay? All of that money went to printing the book. And now I've got 800 copies of this book. So if you'd like to see me get paid for making 7-inch Kara, you could buy a copy of volume 2 and that would help. But yeah, this is an area that obviously somebody who's an editor, somebody who could curate this, someone who could lay it out better and knows what they're doing would have been beneficial, right? This is an area where maybe we didn't invent the light bulb. Like the idea was nice, but maybe it needed more space. Because we did also we were trying to hit specific page number goals, because when you're printing, you want to do it in sets of 4. And so I think I had this initially spread out over 4 pages, and we had to condense it a lot just because of printing necessities. Got to talk about some of my favorite watercolor techniques and scanning and making, I got to do this really rich back of the book to inspire people to make their own comics. And I don't know that me being a no-name in comics would have been able to convince an editor to let me do a full watercolor book and then let the whole 1/3 of the back of the book be how-to and process for the art nerds out there. But Oh, and I chose to do, because this printer would allow us to do interior cover printing and create space wooden. So we chose to do this, and we designed that. Like, a lot of comic artists have to do everything soup to nuts. And it's not really discussed. I don't really know why. Like, they're expected to lay the book out, some of them. And they're not necessarily paid more for that. It's expected. With this book, we chose everything about it. I redid the cover twice because I didn't like the first cover, and I wish I could redo it again and make her bigger and clean some stuff up, but it is what it is. You got to move it on at some point. So for me personally, I don't make hardly any money. I don't make a living off of comics. It is purely vocational because I just love them so much and I love the art form so much. But I am able to make choices that no publisher would sign off on because I'm a comics nobody drawing a comic about a little girl. Like, that, it's easier. If you make comics about little boys, it's an easier sell because girls will read books about boys, but it's much harder to convince parents of boys to buy books about girls for their sons. Boys will read books about girls, but there's still a lot of misandry and misogyny, and it's real stupid. It's really dumb. But, so if I'd made Kara a boy, and I heard that literally at Red Stick Cares, which is like a little market for neurodiv people, like, well, do you have a version where the main character is a boy? Because my son has ADHD, but he's male, and the son's already like flipping through the book and liking it. You know, like, you could just buy this one for him. Also, there's Tanner, who is a boy Lilliputian. Like, it isn't just all girls all the time. But he isn't ADHD and he isn't the main character. But I mean, she does have like a male Lilliputian best friend that she hangs out with. You know, there is some male representation here. And also, like, her dad has a huge part in the story. So I don't know. But there's some parents and some adults, when buying for children, they just can't understand that their kid could maybe empathize with someone who is ADHD like them, but maybe isn't male like them. They can't understand that empathy can be developed through reading books about people who aren't you. And the kid was already on board. Like, if I were selling to the kid, that sale would have been done. Selling to parents and grandparents is the harder part. Selling to kids, super easy. They see it, they like it, they get super excited to find out she's 7 inches tall and has these adventures and it takes place outside. Like, they love that. It's the parents who look at it and they're like, yeah, but do you have any real books? You know, real books with words. Not this, not whatever this is that isn't words. You know, and that, it bums me out because, like I told you guys before, I've done my thesis on how comics support literacy. And any reading is good reading. Any reading is training your brain to read. And comics in and of themselves are phenomenal for children with neurodivergencies or learning disabilities. We have cause and effect. We have time sequences and how time progresses. We have the sequential storytelling where you can see what happens in order, which is hugely important for some children. We have facial expressions that often correlate with the emotions, but not always. And then we can explore that. Like, comics are so cool. The industry is so rough. Speaking of books, it's also worth mentioning that if I was working with traditional publishers, with traditional publishing timelines, I never would have had the time to clean up and collate Lilliputian Living into a book because, first off, these are done as like my October inking challenges, and while I try not to let them take up the entire day, there are some days when they do, and if I was working with a traditional publisher, that just wouldn't be possible for me to do. But also, it took time to write the descriptions and to collate everything and lay it out into a book. This is one of our faster books to produce in that I had been working on this over the space of 4 years, and I'm working on the second volume of this book. But again, if I were working with a traditional publisher, given those timelines, I might not have had the time to put something like this out. And that goes for Curious Little Things, my coloring book as well. So since so many people really liked Lilliputian Living, but they wanted a coloring book version of it, we collated it even further and selected illustrations that are, and even redid some illustrations to make it easier and more fun to color. And then there's a bunch of new illustrations like this one here that have been worked in as well. And if I was working with a traditional publisher on traditional publishing timelines, these kind of side projects, while they wouldn't discourage me from doing it if I had the time on top of all the other things, it just would have been harder to do them and harder to finesse them and harder to justify doing something like this when I would already be so busy and so worn out and so tired from everything else that I was already juggling. I'm not here to be a comics industry apologist. I kind of noped out on that by necessity, by blacklisting, and just by my own health a while back. So I'm not here to apologize for publishers. I'm not here to apologize for how they treat artists. I think that is shameful. I think they should be ashamed. I am embarrassed for them of the lack of response and galvanization around Comics Broke Me. It's like they're hoping we'll just shut up and go away. I am really disappointed with how they're responding. And I think they think we're just going to shut up and go away, and then they can just replace us with somebody cheaper. One of those people who are like, well, you just don't work hard enough, and you're just not skilled enough, and you're just not willing to work cheap enough, and you don't work fast enough. They're going to replace us with one of them. And that is sure a choice, and that breaks my heart, because you're going to lose some of the most generous, passionate, compassionate, sweet, funny, amazing people I've ever met in my life. When you replace them with those people who I've known people like that, and some of them are just garbage people. Like, they will lie to your face. They will stab you in the back. They're going to one cheek sneak the art to get it out to you. They're not going to be, if they're willing to throw their own under the bus so quickly, do you really think they wouldn't throw you under the bus just as quick? And the same goes in reverse. If these publishers are treating their prized talents like garbage and can't even be sorry, can't even express empathy when one of them passes away from overwork, do you really think you are so shiny, so wonderful, such a talent that they wouldn't do that to you in a minute? I mean, you want to talk about comics? Look at what comics had done to Jack Kirby. So, I'm not here to be like, going self-publishing is the best choice and everyone should do it and it always works out all the time. Not at all. Like y'all, it's not working out for me. I'm not making any money. But I love the comics that I do, and I'm proud of the comics that I do. And that's hard for me. Like, I have to go to therapy for that. But like, looking back at my work and talking to you about it, I'm really, really proud of what I've done. And this is something that when I die and I talk to my maker about it, and he's like, so did you waste all your time working on 7-inch Kara? No, I did not waste my time. It didn't go the way I wanted it to. It didn't go the way I thought it would. I have made some sacrifices that I probably should not have made because they were not worth it. But I love this comic, and being able to draw it for myself on my own time frame, and having one of the most patient audiences in the world. Y'all are so nice to me. Oh, thank you guys so much. Makes me want to keep working on this comic. If y'all weren't so nice, I would keep working on it and just not share it with anybody. It would just be my comic that I sell at cons. And you could buy it if you really want to. But because I crave that communication, I crave that validation, and I want Kara to be there, whether you can afford to buy the books, whether you can fill out a library request form and your library will get the books, which please, if you can't afford to buy the books, please fill out a library request form and ask them to carry these books. It doesn't cost you anything. Or you're going to read it as a webcomic. I just want you to share Kara's experiences. And if you have ADHD, or if you resonate with Kara in some way, male, female, non-binary, still thinking about who you are on this journey of life, if you resonate with Kara, I want that to be out there for you, because it wasn't there for me when I was growing up, and doggone it, I could do something about that for the next generation. So that's basically why I self-publish, self-distribute, independently promote 7-inch Kara, as opposed to shelving this passion project and focusing entirely on working, or attempting, in my case, to work with publishers and attempting to meet their deadlines and attempting to pitch the kind of stuff that they want when they say they want own voices and they say they want neurodivergent but they don't represent that at all, or they don't have structures in place to support us being able to create our best work for them in an environment that feels safe and encouraging, even if we're not all making the money we should be making. Like, if you can't afford to pay an artist a fair rate, part of me, the real spicy part, wants to be like, then don't be in this game. But realistically, most of us want to make comics. If you can't afford to pay us at the get-go what we should be paid, treat us with respect. Treat our work with respect. Be passionate about our work. Be an advocate for what we do. Try to help us make connections at schools and at libraries for additional paying work. Introduce us to your other editor and publisher friends who are looking for spot artists and spot illustrations. I have often argued that I'm willing to work by trade. If you are a carpenter and you want to commission me to draw your family and your pet, I'm willing to work by trade. We can figure something out. But a lot of this industry doesn't want to budge at all. We're very replaceable to them. And I can't live like that. Like, that is a trigger for me. And it makes me very, very sick. And I can't work like that. And I tried doing that run, and it was killing me emotionally. So I just can't do that. And at least I can do this, and I can feel proud of myself and feel like, while my choices are not making the kind of money that I'd like to make in the United States, which is so often about money and so often about popularity, at least I can make comic pages that I'm proud of.